Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel Geography with Sumona. I am Sumona. In today's video, we are going to discuss a very important topic in the atmospheric science, that is homosphere and heterosphere. In this video, we will understand what homosphere and heterosphere are, how they differ from each other, and the different layers. First, we should understand that Earth's atmosphere is not uniform throughout its entire vertical extent. In other words, we can say that the composition and characteristic of the atmosphere change as we move upward from the Earth's surface. Based mainly on the distribution and mixing of gases, the atmosphere can be divided into two major chemical regions. First is the homosphere and second is the heterosphere. The homosphere is the lower region where gases are relatively well mixed and their proportion remain almost uniform. Above this region lies the heterosphere, where gases become separated according to their molecular weight. This means that lighter gases become more dominant as we go to the greater altitude. For example, near the Earth's surface, gases like nitrogen and oxygen are well mixed, but at very high altitude, lighter gases such as hydrogen and helium become increasingly important. So, in simple words, we can say that the atmosphere is divided into the homosphere, where gases are well mixed, and the heterosphere, where gases are arranged according to their molecular weight. Now let's talk about the first major region, which is homosphere. The homosphere extends from the Earth's surface up to approximately 82,000 km in altitude. Sorry, not 1,000, 100 km. It is the lower part of the atmosphere where the different gases remain well mixed, so their relative proportion remain almost constant with increasing altitude. The main reason for this mixing is the continuous movement of air. Wind circulation, turbulence and convection keep the gases thoroughly mixed. For example, whether we are at sea level or at an altitude of around 10 km, the proportion of the major gases in the air remains almost the same. This is why the air we breathe contains approximately the same proportion of nitrogen and oxygen at different height within the homosphere. So we can remember the homosphere as the zone of mixing, where atmospheric gases are well mixed. Think of the homosphere as a huge atmospheric blender. Just like a blender continuously mixes different ingredients together, the atmosphere also continuously mixes its gases through turbulence, wind circulation and convection. Because of this constant mixing, the major gases maintain a relatively uniform composition throughout the homosphere. The atmosphere is mainly composed of nitrogen, which is about 78%, and oxygen, which is about 21%. The remaining small portion include gases such as argon, carbon dioxide and other trace gases. For example, when we breathe air at the Earth's surface, we are breathing a mixture that contains mainly nitrogen and oxygen. The same general proportion of these major gases is maintained at higher altitude within the homosphere because of continuous atmospheric mixing. So the key point is that mixing prevents the gases from separating according to their molecular weight in this region. Now let's look at the main characteristic of the homosphere. The first characteristic is uniformity. Because of strong horizontal and vertical mixing, the proportion of the major atmospheric gases remain relatively uniform throughout this region. The second characteristic is weather and climate. The homosphere includes the atmospheric layer where most of the weather and climate related processes occur. For example, cloud, rainfall, storms and winds are mainly associated with the lower atmosphere, particularly the troposphere. The third important characteristic is life. The homosphere contains the part of the atmosphere that support life on Earth. It provides essential gases such as oxygen for human and animals and carbon dioxide for photosynthesis in plants. It also includes the region where birds and aircraft operate. So in simple words, we can remember the three important features of the homosphere as uniform gas composition, weather and climate processes, and support for life. Now we are moving from the homosphere toward the heterosphere. The transition between these two regions occurs at approximately 80 to 100 km above the Earth's surface. This boundary is not a sharp, fixed line. Its exact height can vary depending on atmospheric condition. As we move above this altitude, the density of the atmosphere decreases significantly. The air becomes extremely thin and the process of continuous mixing becomes much weaker. In the homosphere, turbulence, wind circulation and convection act like an atmospheric blender and keep the gases well mixed. But at higher altitude, the mixing becomes less effective. As a result, gravity starts to play a more important role. The different gases begin to separate according to their molecular mass or molecular weight. The heavier gases tend to remain at lower level while lighter gases are found at progressively greater altitude. This marks the beginning of the heterosphere, where the composition of gases is no longer uniform. So, we can think of the 80 to 100 kilometer region as a transition zone between the well-mixed homosphere and compositionally separated heterosphere. Now let's understand the heterosphere. The heterosphere is the atmospheric region located above approximately 80 to 100 kilometers. In this region, the air density becomes extremely low, so the gases are no longer mixed as thoroughly as they are in the homosphere. Here, the gases begin to separate and form distinct layers according to their molecular mass. This process is also called stratification. In simple words, the heavier gases tend to be found at relatively lower levels while the lighter gases become more dominant at higher altitude. Another important characteristic of the heterosphere is its very low atmospheric density. Because the air is so thin, this region also exposed to a greater amount of solar radiation. The heterosphere is also very important for space activities. Satellite and spacecraft operate in the upper atmosphere and beyond, making this region significant for space exploration and satellite communication. So we can remember that the heterosphere is the zone of stratification where gases are arranged according to their molecular mass. Now let's understand how the gases become separated in the heterosphere. We can think of gravity as a natural sorter. In the homosphere, strong turbulence keeps the gases mixed. But in the heterosphere, the atmosphere is much thinner and there is very little mixing. As a result, gravity becomes more effective in separating the gas molecules according to their molecular weight. For example, we can compare this process with oil and water. When oil and water are mixed together and then left undisturbed, they eventually separate into different layers because they have different densities. Similarly, in the heterosphere, different gases tend to become separated according to their molecular mass. Heavier gases are more concentrated at lower levels, while lighter gases are found at greater altitude. Therefore, the heterosphere is called the zone of stratification. Now let's compare the homosphere and heterosphere based on some important characteristics. First is the altitude range. The homosphere extends from the Earth's surface up to approx 80 to 100 km, while the heterosphere extends above this region. Second is gas distribution. In the homosphere, gases are relatively uniformly mixed. In contrast, in the heterosphere, gases become arranged in layers according to their molecular weight. Third is air density. The homosphere has relatively higher air density, whereas the heterosphere has extremely low air density. Fourth is mixing. Strong mixing due to turbulence and convection occur in the homosphere. In the heterosphere, there is very little mixing and diffusion becomes more important. The dominant processes are also different. In the homosphere, we mainly observe weather, climate and convection, whereas in the heterosphere, molecular separation becomes the dominant process. Finally, the human activities associated with this region are different. The homosphere is important for aviation and weather system, while the upper atmosphere and space environment is important for satellite and space missions. So, the easiest way to remember the difference is homosphere means mixing while heterosphere means stratification or separation. Now let's look at the four major layers of the heterosphere. As we move upward through the heterosphere, the gases become progressively separated according to their molecular mass. The first layer is the nitrogen layer or molecular nitrogen layer, where nitrogen, which is relatively heavier than the gases above it, is more dominant. Above this is the atomic oxygen layer, where oxygen becomes dominant gas. The third layer is helium layer. Finally, at the highest level shown here is the hydrogen layer. Therefore, from the lower to higher level, the four layer can be remembered as molecular nitrogen layer, atomic oxygen layer, helium layer, hydrogen layer. Now let's look at the first layer of the heterosphere known as the nitrogen layer or molecular nitrogen layer. It extends approx from 80 to 200 km above the Earth's surface. Nitrogen is still relatively abundant in this region because it is a comparatively heavy gas. However, as altitude increases, its concentration gradually decreases. Sounding rocket passing through this region help scientists study the distribution of nitrogen molecules. Above the nitrogen layer lies the atomic oxygen layer or oxygen layer, extending roughly from 200 to 1000 km. At this great height, the atmosphere is extremely thin and strong ultraviolet radiation from the sun can break oxygen molecules or oxygen into individual oxygen atoms. This atomic oxygen can interact with spacecraft and satellite in lower Earth orbit and may cause a small amount of atmospheric drag. Next comes the helium layer, which extends approx from 1000 to 3500 km. Because helium is lighter than oxygen and nitrogen, it becomes more abundant at this higher altitude. The atmosphere here is extremely thin. Scientists study this region to understand how the upper atmosphere interacts with solar radiation and how gases can gradually escape into space. Finally, we reach the hydrogen layer, which is associated with the outermost part of the atmosphere or the exosphere. It extends from roughly 3,500 km to more than 10,000 kilometers. Hydrogen is the lightest gas, so it is found at the highest level of the heterosphere. Here, gas particles are extremely far apart, and some hydrogen atom can gain enough energy to escape Earth's gravitational pull and move into outer space. So, from the relatively heavy nitrogen near the bottom to the lightest hydrogen at the top, the heterosphere show a clear separation of gases according to their molecular mass. Now let's understand why studying the homosphere and heterosphere is important. The homosphere is important for life because it contains the gases and conditions needed for weather, climate and living organism. On the other hand, the heterosphere is important for studying satellites, communication system and space exploration. So, we can say that both regions plays an important role in understanding our Earth and its atmosphere. Thank you for watching this video. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel. See you in the next class.